All right. We are week 1 of our series, Everyday Monk. And it's something that hit me as we are starting the series and starting to get into it, that it is the most wonderful season of the year, which is Lent, but it's something else that's going on that is absolutely awesome. What else is going on right now?
But not really. The Olympics.
The Olympics. All right? The Olympics. All right? I love the Olympics. Okay? I think the Olympics are absolutely awesome. And I love the storyline in the Olympics. Okay? I love hearing the stories of the different athletes and what's going on and the great successes and the heartaches and the whole 9 yards. I love it all. And I want to talk about 2. All right? So these 2, Michaela Schifrin, she's a USA gold medalist in the giant slalom. So she placed 5th 4 years ago back in Sochi. And she made, after her interview, she made a comment that she's going to work so hard and come back and win the gold. And so, over the last 4 years, she trained, she worked hard, she refined her skill, and this year she won her first gold in the giant slalom. And if you know anything about the giant slalom, which I don't know much of, okay, but they go close to 80 miles an hour downhill, which is absolutely insane, and no human should be going that fast without more padding, all right? But she won her first gold. Next to her is Slev Kramer. So this man has appeared in the last 4 Olympic Games. So he started back when he was 15, around there, and is now like 30 or something like that. All right. He's won multiple gold medals. He is by far the most famous athlete in the Netherlands, to the point that this last week when he had his race, which I'm going to talk about the race, that schools stopped and showed this live in the classrooms. That the announcers are saying all schools in Netherlands stopped teaching in order to show this race, okay? They had live feeds like from Netherlands to the broadcasters of Netherlands in the Olympics, and they're saying like, bars have all been silent. Everybody stopped working to watch this race, which was a 10,000 meter race. They go around the track like, I don't know, like 20 times, something like that. One of these. So he's won several golds, but he's always missed this one. In the last 4 Olympics, he's always come up short. And for the first third, a little bit more than a third, this man was on track. He was only behind the leader, from Canada. He was only behind the leader for about by 1 second every lap. And then he just fatigued, and as the race went on, he got further and further away, missed his chance to, for gold. He was asked, so you're going to come back to the next Olympics? And he's like, I don't know, I think it's for this race that I keep on coming back to the Olympics, because he wants to win. But he keeps on missing. When I think about winning gold, like what greater accomplishment, as an athlete, what greater accomplishment is there than winning gold? I mean, once you've won the gold in your respective sport, what else is there? You've reached the pinnacle. You've reached the pinnacle. If you watch the Olympics with me, there are times like, I'll hide it, but I get teary-eyed because of the storylines behind those who win the gold, all right? I think it's one of the coolest things. And I always wonder, man, what would it be like to win gold? To be up on that podium, have the medal like put over your neck, hear your national anthem. I would love to do it if I didn't have to do all the training, all the practicing, all the getting up and doing it over and over again. But when you ask yourself, who are these athletes? When you ask yourself, who are these athletes? Their mothers, their fathers, their sisters, their brothers, their students, they're your co-workers, they're professionals. I'm always surprised. Figure skating, a lot of the figure skatings come from different universities across the United States. They go to school, but somehow they figure out how to become an Olympic figure skater while getting their degree. They carry the same responsibilities that you and I do. They see the same challenges of finances, balancing friendships, political issues and making statements about them, careers, studies, the social challenges of which are amplified for being in the spotlight. I mean, you look at these people, and I think like you can say that these athletes are busy. They're busy people. But I want to look at this word busy because we use it so much. We use busyness as an excuse, okay? But busyness is a state of being, like you're doing something. Everybody is always doing something. Everybody's always doing something. Some of us are busy working. Some of us are busy studying. Some of us are busy having fun. Some of us are busy sleeping. Some of us are busy fubbing, okay? Some of us are busy with the kids. Some of us are busy doing something, watching YouTube, all right? All of us are doing something at some point in our life. Even if you are sleeping, you are doing something which has a purpose because you need the rest in order to get up, to the next day. And we let busyness get us out of more busyness. Somebody always asks you like, hey, do you want to do this? Oh, I'm busy. We use busyness to avoid more busyness. I'm busy with the kids. Oh, I'm busy with this new project. Oh, I'm busy because I got an exam coming up. Like, we use busyness to get out of other busyness. But a busy man will reap a busy reward. A busy man will reap a busy reward. What's a busy reward? Busy reward is you know your head from your feet. Okay? You're so busy doing different things, you don't have good orientation in life. A busy reward is getting to later in life and realizing you're not exactly sure who you are as an individual because you've got no time figuring out who you are as an individual. That's a busy reward. Okay? A busy reward is not knowing what direction to take in life. Being confused about what decision to take. Just because you're busy doesn't mean you actually have a specific direction. Not knowing right or wrong because you spend so much time in the throes of society which makes everything relative, that's the reward of busyness. Looking at your kids as an adult and not knowing how to pass on to them faith or lead them through scripture, that's a busy reward. We don't think about it because we've been too busy in life, only to realize it later on. So a busy man gets a busy reward. Athletes are busy, but not in the same sense that we were just talking about it. Athletes are busy, but really what they are focused. Okay? Athletes aren't just busy, they're focused. Because they're always doing something, but what they are doing has a purpose. They're always doing something, but what they're doing has a purpose. Even if it is going to bed early, that has a purpose. Resting has a purpose for them. Eating right has a purpose for them. When they get up early to go practice before going to work or before going to their classes, depending on what the athlete is, they're focused. They're busy. They have a lot to do. They have to say no to a lot of things. But not just because they're busy, but because they're focused. Focus separates an Olympic athlete from everybody else. There are many people who do the sports that we see on the Olympics. But what separates the Olympic athletes from everybody else is that they are focused. So a busy man will reap a busy reward, but a focused man will reach new heights. All right? Focused man will reach new heights. And so, the reason why I want to talk about Olympic athletes is because we have a parallel. We have a parallel to the Olympic athlete. Right? Don't let the pictures fool you guys. What's similar between our Olympic athlete and a monk? Or really a desert monk? What's similar? Both are busy, actively doing something all the time. Both are busy, actively doing something all the time. Both have a vision for a future reward. Both train every day with the same mixture of tools that mature over time. Both use the same mixture of tools, but they mature over time in their training in order to get to the reward. Both have to make daily decisions that challenge them to remain focused in order to reach where they're going. They're so similar, but what's the key difference between them? An athlete is going for a medal. Well, a monk, the training of a monk never ends. Training never ends. There's no medal or recognition from the crowds, but they are looking for something greater, something that can't be satisfied here on earth. And St. Paul said it well when he said, "And everyone who competes for the prize is temperate in all things. Now they do it to obtain a perishable crown, but we for an imperishable crown." Our Olympic athletes and athletes across the world fight to win the medal. And they train to win the medal. They train for that recognition. But a spiritual athlete trains, but for something that can't be rewarded here. So their vision has to be greater than this earth. Those are two key differences. All right, really the key difference between them. What's the second one? Their physique is slightly different. Just a little. All right, so we look at, okay, what's a spiritual athlete and what do they do? What are the tools that they use? They use tools of fasting, solitude, silence, prayer, repentance, and confession. These aren't limited tools. Okay, the tools that they use are not limited to these, but these are key tools that they will use in their daily training in order to stay focused on the vision that they have and the goal that they're trying to reach. It's the same thing over and over. But being an Olympic athlete, you do the same thing over and over anyway. You get up, you train, you go to work, you come back, you train. You have weights on Monday, you have film on Tuesday, you have technique on Wednesday. It's the same thing over and over and over. It's nothing like, wow. It's the same thing over and over and over. But when paired with a vision, and when paired with a goal, then we move in a direction. Busyness changes from just busyness into focus because of a vision. Fasting disciplines our flesh. Solitude separates us from society. Silence prayer is continual communication. Repentance and confession is quite possibly the hardest work we'll ever spiritually do. But I want to put these practices into context, okay? I want to talk about how these practices came to be. Some of them are biblically rooted, all of them are biblically rooted, but when did we see them actually come into the scene, into the spiritual scene? All right? What is the Coptic Church known for? We say it all the time. We are the Church of the Martyrs. We're the Church of the Martyrs. We capture this liturgically because we read the Synaxar as one of the readings where we talk about the lives of the saints, and many of them have been martyred for their faith. But when we look at martyrdom started really in the 1st century and happened over the first 3 centuries of history. Okay? When we look at the birth of Christianity, we had the death of Jesus, his resurrection, his ascension, and then after his ascension, He gave us the Holy Spirit on Pentecost. And that from that Holy Spirit, Peter preached on that day. 3,000 were added to the church, all right, or, as a result of that. And the church grew. But the church grew under what rule? The Romans. The church was growing under the Roman rule. Yes, they were in Jerusalem and the surrounding regions, but who owned all that land? It was the Roman Empire, who was ruled by Caesar. Right? And we read about that, like when Paul's saying, I want to go to Rome and appeal to Caesar. Like, that's how we know, and also historically, we know that even though Christianity was growing, it was all done under the Roman rule. And the Romans were ugly. The Romans were really ugly. They wanted to protect their empire, and they're willing to protect their empire at any cost. That if there was any sort of insurgents or any sort of rebellion, they come and squash. Caesar was known that if any of like his governors acted out of line, he would call them, okay, to meet with him, and frequently push him over a ledge. You just push him over a ledge, get rid of him. It's an ugly period of time. But this is where Christianity was born. It was born in such an ugly state. And so martyrdom really started to take place in the first century and would continue until 313, which what happened in 313 AD?
Edict of Milan.
Which was? Edict of Milan, which was? Came from who? Constantine. You guys should probably change the literature you read at night. No. Constantine and Edict of Milan, which legalized Christianity. But from the time of Christ up until 313, which we call the first 3 centuries, there was horrible persecution that happened. And depending on how ugly the next Roman emperor was, dictated how much persecution there was. Some were somewhat lighter than the others, some were really bad, like Nero was really ugly, Decius was really ugly, Nero was really ugly, and we hear about them, like this saint died at the hands of like Nero, and this saint died under Decius and stuff like that. We're talking about the first 3 centuries of Christianity under the Roman emperor. Okay? But when you look at Christianity at this time, all right, this was an age where literacy was low. This was an age where technology really didn't exist. All right? Word spread extremely slow, and really how it spread was, I write a letter, I give it to somebody else, they walk it to the next town. They read it, because not everybody could read, okay? And whatever that person heard on a Sunday, or whenever the letter was read, that's what they had to go off of for the week. Okay, how many of us can remember what last week's gospel was? I'm thinking with you, and I'm like, what was last week's gospel? All right? So what about in those days? How is the faith supposed to spread? But yet, the church grew. Because though the faith wasn't written in the way we know it today, there were some writings, and writings were starting to happen, okay? The faith grew not because of what was written and what was read and what was learned, but more so of what was seen. Because what people were seeing was that this new group of Christians seemed to be rubbing the Roman emperor the wrong way. The Roman emperor is killing them in the most brutal of ways, but yet they're willing to die for their faith. And so by what people saw is actually how the church grew more than what they read and what they learned. What they physically saw before their eyes. Are you a Christian? If I'm the Roman emperor, I ask somebody, are you a Christian? And they say, yes, I'm a Christian, go throw them to the beast. Okay, tortured in so many different ways. People were looking, saying like, what are these people doing? Why are they not just saying, okay, I'm not Christian anymore? Because there are actually other pagan religions at that time, which were just a mixed, mishmash of whatever beliefs they wanted. So if they rub the Roman emperor the wrong way or the Roman empire the wrong way, they say, hey, change your beliefs. So like, yeah, sure, no problem. I'll change my beliefs. No need to bring out the lions. Okay, I'm fine. What do you want me to believe? I'll believe it. All of a sudden they look at the Christians and be like, no, we're not going to change our beliefs. And they were dying. When you look at that, it makes you think like, hey, what do they believe that the person next to them doesn't believe? That they are willing to die. So people were looking at people dying for their faith and saying, there's something about that. There's something to this belief that is different than what I see. It was a belief worth dying for. St. Justin, who was martyred in the middle of the 2nd century, wrote this: though beheaded and crucified and thrown to wild beasts in chains and fire and all other tortures, we do not give up our confession. But the more such things happen, the more others in large numbers become believers. He was seeing what was happening. He was seeing that because people were witnessing others dying for their faith, that it spoke more loudly about the content of the faith than any writings could do. Tertullian was another one who became Christian because he witnessed. And he went on to say, the more often you mow us down, the more in numbers we grow. The blood of Christians is seed. This is how the church grew in the first 3 centuries. I'm blown away by this next stat that I want to share. Scholars estimate that in the centuries that Christians were persecuted, that the church grew by nearly 40% every decade. Scholars estimated that in 3 centuries where the Christians were being persecuted, that the population of Christians was growing by 40% each decade. That's an enormous amount of growth. With the lack of technology that they had, the lack of writings that were, out and accessible, with the number of different beliefs that were going on at that time, the number of different heresies, that the Christian faith was growing. Now, because people were dying, there were few who were literate enough to write and capture what was going on. And that's where we kind of see the patristic writings begin. Okay? The fathers who were saying, okay, people are dying. I have the ability to write. So they started to write about our faith. And those are the writings that we have today. But not everybody had access to them like we have access to them. And we've lost, unfortunately, a lot of them. But the patristic writings, the writings of the fathers, came out of this period and continued on, past the Council of Nicaea and so on. But eventually what happened was that the Roman Empire, realizing that they were making the situation worse, that they were trying to get rid of this sect called the Christians and trying to kill them, but it was having the opposite effect, that they were growing in numbers versus decreasing in numbers. So the emperor before Constantine started to slow up a little bit. Okay? Started to slow up and say, okay, we're not going to kill you guys, just stop growing. All right? Until Constantine came in 313 and legalized Christianity. And with the legalization of Christianity, Christians were allowed to assimilate into society. They were allowed to come and kind of get the benefits that everybody else in society had because now they were considered citizens or legitimate. But at the end of the Roman persecution, they were looking around saying something's not right. This assimilation into society isn't right. Our faith cost us something. And we spilled a lot of blood for it. But now all of a sudden, like, we're just going to assimilate into society and kind of move on and be like everybody else. And that didn't sit right. And so what happened was that men and women started to flee to the desert. They didn't want everything that was going to come with modern day society. They started to flee. The early believers answered the various heresies that were going around by shedding their blood, saying our faith is the most important and is the true faith. But once that stopped, we had to feel like, okay, there needs to be some sort of sacrifice in order for my faith to actually have some weight. And so even though the killing of the body stopped, men and women felt like, okay, there's a deeper battle inside the soul. And so they started to flee to the deserts to chase after their relationship with God. The mind switched from the attack switched from the body into the heart, mind, and soul. And they felt in order to really deal with the attack that was coming on the mind, the heart, the soul, and all the things that we were starting to gather as being part of society, the only way to really address it is to head out. And so they avoided spiritual laziness and complacency by going to the desert to sacrifice. Led by St. Anthony, Father of monasticism, men and women started to go to the desert. They couldn't sacrifice their blood, they would sacrifice the world. Later, we call them the fathers and mothers of the desert. But when we look at the fathers and the mothers of the desert, okay, which took on what we refer to or can be referred to as the white martyrdom, okay, which is taking seriously the persecution of the soul. When we look at them, there's a story that kind of captures what they were trying to do. And the story is in the book, you'll read it in the beginning, in the introduction. And this comes from Arsenius. He was a well-educated Roman senator who lived in the palace with Emperor Theodosius. While living in the palace, he prayed, "Lord, show me the way of salvation." A voice said to him, "Arsenius, flee from the world and you'll be saved." So he fled to the desert and again prayed, "Lord, lead me in the way of salvation." And a voice said, "Arsenius, flee, be silent, and pray, for these are the sources of sinlessness." And so he did. When we look at our fathers and mothers of the desert, they sacrificed for their faith. They sacrificed material things. They sacrificed positions. They sacrificed their time. They sacrificed what they would read and focus on. They sacrificed, for prayer. Because our faith has to be tied to a sacrifice. If our faith has no sacrifice, then what is it actually worth? Why is freedom in this country so cherished? Why did when, for example, using the thing where people are kneeling down during the national anthem, why does that rub people the wrong way? Because they say men and women went and died for us to have our freedom, and the flag represents that freedom, and we're not going to disrespect it because it's tied to a sacrifice. Okay, that belief is tied to a sacrifice. Our faith has to be tied to a sacrifice. The reason why it was so precious under persecution was because the sacrifice was our own blood. That's why the faith was so important. But now, when we're being persecuted, what else are we going to sacrifice to say that our faith and the life we choose is actually worth it? Tell you a story. In the Old Testament, David, towards the end of his life, had a census that went out because he wanted to see how well his kingdom was, how big his kingdom was. So he did the census, despite being told, don't do the census. After he did the census, God said, I'm going to punish you in one of three ways. make a long story short, David chose the way which would keep him under the hand of God, which God sent the plague out, which would kill many people. But at the end, when David's like, all right, enough of this, I'm going to go and make a sacrifice, because he was told to end the plague, go make a sacrifice in this field. So he went out to the field, which belonged to somebody. And the guy who came up said, you're the king, just take the land. Like, go ahead, take my land and offer the sacrifice. No charge. And David said, no, but I will buy them from you for a price. I will not offer burnt offerings to the Lord my God that cost me nothing. Christ himself established our faith through sacrifice. There is an inseparable link between sacrifice and faith. If there's no sacrifice, faith means very little. If there's no sacrifice, faith means very little. Why? Like when we work for our jobs and we get very far in our careers, and a threat comes of being laid off. Why? Like we feel threatened, we feel afraid. We feel like, I worked so hard to get to this position. I believe in this position. I believe in what I'm doing. Why? Because you've sacrificed along the way. It means something to you. Without sacrifice, there's very little meaning in what we do. St. Paul said in Romans, who God put forward as a sacrifice of atonement by his blood, effective through faith. He was linking faith and sacrifice. So, with these in mind, we have to look and say, what am I called to? What sort of faith do I believe in? And what does my faith call me to do? St. Peter said it well in his epistle. He said, for you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own special people, that you may proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light, who once were not a people, but are now a people of God, who had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy. Beloved, I beg you as sojourners and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lusts which war against the soul, having your conduct honorable among the Gentiles, that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may be your good works, which they observe, glorify God in the day of visitation. Okay? So I'm going to break this down a little bit, but I want to break it down in the context of a worldview, because so many times we talk about the idea and understanding of what a worldview is, because a worldview is essential because it guides what we do while we walk here on earth. And every worldview has answers what 4 questions? Origin, purpose, destiny, morality. Origin, purpose, morality, destiny. Our worldview has to answer this. As Orthodox Christians, we have to answer these 4 because it comprises like what a worldview is. And as a Christian, claiming to be a Christian is essentially a worldview stance. So when we look at this from Peter, I kind of chopped it up. When we look at our purpose, we are his own people who receive light and mercy and called to proclaim the praises of him. Our purpose here on earth is about heaven. Our purpose here on earth is to state like, I'm going to heaven. Okay? I'm his son, his daughter, but my eye is focused on heaven. Morality, as sojourners and pilgrims abstain from fleshly lusts which war against the soul, having your conduct honorable. We're called to live in a certain way. And the last one, destiny, by your good works which they observe, glorify God in the day of visitation. Okay? We believe that God is coming back. He's going to come back and visit us. What St. Peter is doing is he's challenging us to have a bigger vision for why we are here. Okay? And he's also saying that it's going to cost us something. Our faith is going to cost us something. When we take a step back from the daily grind, and we begin to ask the question, well, what am I doing here and why? And we begin to answer them through the Orthodox Christian worldview, we'll find that many of our life practices are out of place. that we put priorities on the wrong things. But unless we take a step back and have a bigger view, we'll always continue to put our effort in the wrong things, in the wrong areas. And that's what happens when we have a short-sighted vision for life. We just get busy. We don't live focused, we just live busy. But a God-sized vision requires God-sized tools. And so, when we begin to challenge ourselves to look at life through the eyes of eternity, we'll see the different practices that we engage in life, and hopefully begin to shift from a life of busyness to a life of focus. And so, we titled this series, Everyday Monk. Okay? Because we're called to an ascetical life, okay, which is ascetical life is what the monks do. Okay? But we're called to do it daily. But I want to say what this series is not. Okay? What this series is not. This series is not about presenting monastic practices that are out of reach. That'd be a waste of time. Okay? This is not about simply talking about these tools because we're Orthodox Christians and we should. Okay? I'm under no contract to talk about these tools. Okay? I do not have to report them across. I've done my good job. I've talked about Orthodox monasticism. Like, I'm moving on to the next. No. I don't have to talk about these things, but these things are important. All right? Well, this series is not about dropping out of your respective careers or positions or wherever you are and fleeing to the desert. It's not about that. I actually want you to be exactly where you are. I just want to challenge the different things that we do about that. Remember our athletes? Their fathers, their mothers, their brothers, sisters, students, they go to work. We all do the same. But we can be focused in how we go day to day about our schedules. What this series is, it's about taking these time-tested tools and learning to implement that in today's society. It's about looking at these tools and saying, okay, what does each one actually do? What, like, if I go and practice solitude, what should I expect? When should I expect it to? What pitfalls should am I going to come into contact, face along the way? You're telling me be silent. Okay, but I go to a business meeting. I'm not going to sit there with my hands folded. When my boss asks me a question, no, that's not the silence that we're talking about. But there is silence that we can practice. Because there is silence where we go to the barber shop, sit down, and because we don't have an appointment, we have to wait. There is silence that we can practice by not whipping out our phone and looking on Facebook. There is silence that we can practice. So this is about challenging us to see in everyday life how we can begin to incorporate these tools. It is not about yanking ourselves out of life. I actually want to read something that comes from one of the early church fathers in a letter. It's called the Letter to Diognetus. And it was somewhere around the 1st, 2nd century. But something he wrote about, the letter is talking about how Christians are different, yet in the world. And I want to read a section of it, because I think it's awesome. Okay? It's awesome. And this tells me that, although the early church fathers, it seemed like they're all old and they're in the past and they're outdated, they knew they were dealing with the same struggles that we struggle with. Okay? So I want to read this. For the Christians are distinguished from other men, neither by country nor language, nor the custom which they observe. For they neither inhabit cities of their own, nor employ a peculiar form of speech, nor lead a life which is marked out by any singularity. The course of conduct which they follow has not been devised by any speculation or deliberation of inquisitive men, nor do they, like some, proclaim themselves to be advocates of any merely human doctrines. But inhabiting Greek as well as barbarian cities, so they live everywhere, according as the lot each of them has determined. Pretty much like, that's where they live. Like, you live in Maryland. Why do you live in Maryland? You just live in Maryland. I live in Maryland too. We all have a story of how we got here, but we all live in Maryland. All right? Okay, each of them has determined, and following the customs of the natives in respect to clothing, food, and the rest of their ordinary conduct. Pretty much, they look like everybody else. So aside from me, you all look like everybody else in society. Okay? They display to us their wonderful and confessed striking method of life. They dwell in their own countries, but simply as sojourners. As citizens, they share in all things with others, and yet endure all things as foreigners. Early church fathers weren't telling us to run from society. They weren't saying flee. There are fathers and mothers who went to the desert to sacrifice. But all of us are not going to go to the desert. But man, we can sure learn from them. Because the same persecution that they're fleeing, which is the persecution of the soul, is a persecution that you and I go through day in and day out. It's persecution of our mind. It's persecution of our hearts. Laziness, complacency. We have to learn and challenge ourselves to, as he put it here, to endure in our city, but as sojourners. That we're here, but we're not always going to be here. We need to live with a transcendent vision for life. Something that looks beyond what we see day in and day out. Because only when we have a transcendent view of life, of what our ultimate goal is, and really see what is trying to take that away from us, only then are we going to come to the series and everything that we're going to talk about in this series over Lent and say, okay, it is worth me finding a little bit of solitude. I may miss out on things. I may not hang out as much. But that solitude does something for me. That everybody's talking about something new in the news. That even if I'm in a group, I can just be quiet. That fasting is tough. And man, there are other churches who just do it seem to be slightly just more lenient than what we do. Can I just give up one thing for Lent? Why do I gotta give up food groups? Okay? But if I can have a transcendent view of what that does, transcendent vision for what that does, then maybe I'll say that the sacrifice is worth it. So, St. Paul says, sorry, I forgot to switch the slides when I was reading, you didn't notice that. St. Paul says in Romans, and do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable, perfect will of God. Success is found not in the new and exciting. Success is found in doing the same practices over and over that strike to the core of who we are as people. Success is not found in always discovering something new and exciting. Success is found when we look at the practices that have been time-tested, that deal with the things that are persecuting us in today's day and age. We will find success. And when we practice them, and figure out how to practice them daily, and understand why I am practicing this, we will learn to become everyday monks or sojourners. Because whether we want to ascribe to it or not, our faith calls us to that. Whether we really want to believe that I'm a sojourner or not, everything in the Bible says you're a sojourner. I can either embrace the truth and take on a transcendent vision for my life, or I can go about my everyday with a short-sighted vision and reap a busy man's reward. So, I'm looking forward to this series. One of the things I would say that would be helpful, at times we've talked about doing a rule of life in this community. And a rule of life is a way to kind of objectively look at our lives in 4 different quadrants of spirituality, like prayer life, my rest, my relationships, and my work. Okay? And it helps us see where is my time going in life. Okay? Our homework for this week, which I will send out today, okay, is to, if you haven't done so already, fill out the rule of life. Okay? There's an instruction sheet that comes with it. Okay, you fill it out, and I want you to bring it throughout the series. Because as you bring it throughout the series, every week, we hope to offer different tools, techniques, things to do to implement the things that we're talking about. And so if you can begin to kind of look at your rule of life and maybe figure out different ways to implement these, I think you're going to benefit greatly from this series. You are not alone in struggling with solitude and silence and prayer, stuff like that. That's why we have community groups, to let you know you're not alone. To also look at your neighbor and find encouragement and hope. So everybody's encouraged to join a community group, or at least form one, with a couple people around you. So the rule of life will go out today in an email. Challenge you to read the instructions, fill it out as best as you can, and bring it week in and week out. And as we talk about the different tools, maybe you can begin to kind of change your prayer life. Any questions? All right, so hopefully, if you weren't in a community group, I've convinced you to join a community group. All right? But I really hope is that you join us for a 6-week journey. Okay? Week 1 is down, right? But we have many weeks to go. And we'll see that as a community, if we challenge ourselves to implement these tools personally, then when we come back communally, we'll have a church with a faith that means something. On that, let's stand up and pray. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, and we thank you, Lord, for everything you're doing for us, and thank you for this day. We ask, Lord, that you would continue to guide us on this journey, that you would challenge us to see ourselves as sojourners here on earth, to take the tools that you have given to us through our fathers and mothers of the devil, to figure out how to implement them, to challenge ourselves, to sacrifice in our time and our energy, and the things that we commit to, and recommit to things that really address the heart of our lives. We're persecuted in such different ways. Persecuted in our beliefs, hearts, so many different ways. To help us to pick up the right tools to deal with these battles. So we ask you, Lord, to guide us every step of the way, as a community, as individuals. Through the intercessions of all your saints who have pleased you from the beginning, hear us as we say, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. In Christ Jesus, our Lord, thine is the kingdom, power, and glory. Now the love of God, the Father, the grace of his only begotten Son, our Lord God, Savior, Jesus Christ, the King, gives the Holy Spirit, we bring you all, go in peace, the Lord be with you.